I think I started, so we supposed to be live already.
We are. So, hello, everyone. Hello, Alice and Alex.
Hi.
Yes, hello, John, Alice.
So, today, it's so great to see you guys. And today we are continuing our Let's Talk Through It series, but this one is about reflections to the future. And I'll read off a little bit about the headline for this is that, how our reflections of the past and exploring the lessons in those reflections help us create a new future and help us move forward. And so we're going to talk about some of our reflections and our memories from the past, and figuring out how they may have allowed us to continue to move forward and maybe created change in ourselves, and created some type of change. So, so that's what we're going to be talking about today and sharing amongst each other. So, Alice, would you be willing to start this conversation and share what's coming up for you around this topic of reflections to the future?
Okay. When I was thinking about the topic and the title, I really do believe that there are times and events in our past that are setting us up for the present or for the future. And I think we are in one of those times right now. And it's always and it gives us the opportunity when we reflect on the past. It gives us the opportunity to look at the past where we're standing now, but it also gives us that distance between them to make a choice now of everything we've learned from the event to now. So I think if we look at that and we look at the why behind the choices we make, because right now we're making really complicated and uncomfortable choices when it comes to the virus, when it comes to racism. So if something happened in the past and I can look at it where I stand today, I have all the knowledge and learning from that event up to today. So I can make a different choice than what I would have made in the past. So I think that's how I feel about how our past and reflecting on it can create our future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm curious, what maybe is a story for you that you would be willing to share that you reflected, there's been time and space in between,
Mhm.
and that it's allowed you to make a different choice. Would you mind sharing something with us?
Well, the story that we talked about last week, where I look back now on my growing up as a child and the situations and the things, the what I thought what was my normal then. I look back on it now and I realize that wasn't normal. Where I had to go to my family and I, all blacks, had to go to the back door to purchase a burger, or go to the window to purchase ice cream. At that time, I thought that was normal. But when I reflect back on it, knowing everything that has happened between that time up until now, I see it completely different. I know it different. So it's things like this. That was the one that we talked about last week.
Yeah. Thank you. Wonderful. So, Alex, what are your thoughts and maybe a story that you might be able to share in terms of that experience of reflecting on something from the past that's allowed
You
you to
cannot
make a
believe,
choice
You cannot believe how many thoughts do I have right now. It's just when I was listening, Alice, yeah, I have so many kind of associations running in my head with a kind of crazy speed. So first of all, I really like the title. Alice, you wrote the title, and for me, I think that kind of paradoxical choice of words, reflections, kind of implying something, looking back in the past, and suddenly reflections on the future. I like it. It's almost like association, almost like the series of movies, Back to the Future. Do you remember it? Some kind of sci-fi, funny kind of movies. Yeah, that's the first thing. I think there is something magical in those combinations of reflections on the future. I like it. I mean, this is the first. Yeah, I would say my thought is. Second thing is, when Alice was talking, I actually big fan of the Matrix movie. I don't know. And right now, when Alice was explaining, making like a first few sentences, I really caught myself in the comparison. I almost back to the scene when the Oracle. If I don't know if you're familiar with when the Neo came to the Oracle in Matrix, and he said, how can I make a choice? And Oracle, by the way, Oracle in the second part of the Matrix also was a black woman. I mean, the actress was playing the black woman, and she said, well, you didn't come here to make a choice. You chose it already. You came here to understand your choice. And yeah, it's like, again, yeah, this is kind of combination of those. It's amazing topic, to be honest. I mean, and now I'm leading kind of towards the story, which I would like to share, because in my past, one of the biggest kind of influencers I have, actually, it was a book written by Carlos Castaneda. And it's like a series of books and teaching of Don Juan, and there are like 8 or 9 books he wrote. And in that book, one of the shamans, one of the Indians, actually, heritage kind of shamans, and they were teaching teaching the students or pupils, and and he was teaching about how to collect energy. They were calling themselves almost like a warriors, almost like a hunters for energy, because they believe that the magic and all the abilities and all kind of power of perception comes from the energy pool, and there are special technique how you could get your energy back. And one of the things what I believe, because of those books, or because of my background as a scientist, I do believe that when we are living our past the way it is, the past already creating lots of connections and associations which are defining us, which are, in this case, if our past is not, we are not reflecting on it, and we are not kind of finding the way to release it, it actually drives us. If it in some ways we are determined, we are conditioned, we are not free. All those events from the past, if we are not making conscious effort through reflection to become free of it, it will determine who we are. And if we are determined, we are not free. We have reactions, we have associations, we have reflexes, we have everything which came from the past. And that's how you become frozen, how you, in some ways, how you are totally determined. You just puppet. You everything what you lived through is driving your current reflections and reactions. So the only way to get free, or that's why we come to freedom, is reflect on the events and somehow release that energy which is kind of frozen. Maybe there are emotions there, maybe there are some painful events there, And when you reflect on it, in many ways you become free. Now you have a choice. That's what Alice said. Now you have a choice how to react or not react at all. And before, without reflection, well, we are in some kind of product of the past. And that's what, that's how, I believe parents are giving to children, and all that kind of vicious circle could go on and on and on, unless someone, stop it all and reflect on the past and make himself or herself free, and finally, make her own choices, not based on the past anymore. I mean, that's what comes through my head. Sorry for a very long explanation, but that was in a split of second kind of going through my head when I was listening for Alice and her first words. And in terms of story, sorry, I just gonna yeah. If I'm anyway telling my story, yeah, the book I was practicing a lot some of the exercises which I found in that Castaneda book, and one of the exercise, for example, was actually to get myself free by eliminating my history or stories. By eliminating, I mean, I had lots of diplomas, I had lots of certificates, I won that competition, I was in gymnastics, I was swimming pool, I was a football player, and I earned lots of so-called, how to say it, rewards and some kind of lots of different things. So after university, I went to some one of the mountains near to the Black Sea, and I collected all that stuff, which I understand kind of defined me, like lots of papers, something which I actually valued, and I burned it all. I mean, literally, I created some kind of fire and burned it all. Yeah, the only thing I left is my university diploma, because I know that will be a little bit tricky, to yeah, maybe I was not sure. Maybe I will be employed, but I need to have at least something. But all my previous rewards and all that kind of certificates, I just burned them all, and it was that was a story, and the idea behind it is not to be defined by anything, because according to that Don Juan teaching, we are defined, for example, by people who knows us. Very often, children are not able to do their own choices because what my father or mother will think. How can I, like they are limited in many ways by what other people might think if they do something, not in accordance to what other people are planning to you. So in many ways, we are kind of, how to say it, binded, not just by the past, but by people around us. So one of the techniques in Don Juan teaching is that there is a period of time when you're supposed to make yourself totally inaccessible, kind of break all the connections. I know it sounds extreme, but in order to be free, you're supposed to be able not to be binded by anything, including, maybe some people who would kind of, how to say it, in a way, kind of keep you the way you are. So this is my story. Yeah, the story of traveling. I think it was 1987. So after university, after graduation, I went to that Black Sea, burned it all, and yeah, I think it and somehow, I don't know, maybe coincidentally, but it was as a result, I moved to the completely different path after that. Maybe because of that, I'm not saying that was the magic kind of event, but after that, I actually changed my career from science to entrepreneurship. So 1989, I already was on an entrepreneurial path. So yeah, kind of free. That's my story.
Thank you. No, thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's very powerful, because the idea in what you experienced of actually physically getting rid of these things. I mean, it's one thing for us to do it within our mind and, kind of work inside of ourselves, but you physically,
You know, those shamans, you know, they like to do some physical burning, you know, to take place.
Yes.
Always.
Yeah.
I saw those movies. They always do some kind of physical stuff. Maybe it's a little bit easier for us to have a representation, tangible representation of some actually psychological act. That's how I explain it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for some, it's this idea of just putting it back into the universe and releasing it, right? We talked a little bit about that release. But you know, even it was interesting. Like, you know, when I was working with the kids with bereavement, it was fascinating because, you know, they all had stories of a loved one who had died in their lives, and so one of the exercises was to create on what they call vellum. So it's something that you can see if it's lit up, you can see the image. And it was so beautiful because it was a message to that person and maybe some memory about that person. But what we did is that we attached them on little foam floaters, basically, and they were standing up and they put a candle. And at night, what they did was they lit them all, and it was dark outside. And each person, each child and person would light it, and you could see the image, the message that was being, you know, given to that person who passed. And they put it into a stream, and you could watch these things move down the stream. And it was so powerful because it wasn't that, you know, the story doesn't completely go away, but there was this sense of release and, in a way, a relief, you know, that it was going back out there. It was being not sent away, but it was being put back out into the universe. And it was so powerful. And as you were sharing this, you know, idea, I was thinking about this moment because it was extremely emotional, because that story, that it was written on this piece of paper, but the memories and the feelings don't really disappear, right? But it was allowing these kids to move forward. It was allowing them to create a new path, you know, towards their future. So that I shared that story because this idea of letting go, and we touched upon that after our last conversation last week, you know, about letting go and releasing, especially these labels or identities that we created or may have been imparted upon us, which I think is a powerful statement, because if we think about our world, so much is about our labels, right? What the world says, you know, you're this or you're that. And, you know, how do we move outside of that and not get stuck in these identities?
Two sides of the coin, you know. The word is power. I mean, Bible, like the first was the word, and I believe that it, as you said last time, I think, John, you said it's a blessing and a curse at the same time, because the words are powerful. It's just almost like a weapon, you know, and it has two sides, and it can move you forward and it can fix you. It can revive you and it can kill you. It's powerful. So we need to have a really kind of wisdom, you know, how to deal with those words, because they can fix us. They can move forward, and at certain point they become a limitation. You know, in some ways you need to, you know, let go, and that letting go is also another topic. How exactly you do that? What does it really mean? I mean, as you said, stories are not going anywhere, but somehow the power of attachment to those stories, much less. Meaning, well, they're not really kind of driving you anymore. They don't have power over you. Stories are there, but emotional kind of charge is, well, gone. You're free. I think that's maybe what is happening usually when you let go. I don't know. Alice, what do you think?
I agree. I was listening to you, and when you were telling how you went up and you burned all the accolades, and
Yeah.
then I was listening to John where he was saying how they lit the candles and released them, and I was thinking about a story that we had talked about with me, where 2 years, I think the beginning of 2018. And I remember thinking, I wish I really had a blank canvas so I could just kind of paint my life the way I want, kind of remove, things I didn't want removed, didn't want any longer. Well, I've always been a collector. I've collected when I travel, I buy little things, I collect, and I had two dresses that I got. My grandfather purchased them for me when I was 5 years old, and they were identical, same color, same style. But he took me to town and he said, "We're going to buy you a dress for Sunday." And I wanted two, so he let me buy two identical dresses, same size, same color, everything. But I had held on to those dresses for 50 some years. Wherever I went, I took those dresses with me. That's just one example of to show how I really hold on to items, how I held on to items. Well, in 2018, in January, I had a fire in my house, and all of those things that I had collected and held on to were burnt that quick. 1 hour I had them, 1 hour I didn't have them. But I also thought the time between the hour I had them and the hour I didn't have them, I really wasn't doing anything to them. So it was as though I didn't have them anyway. But once they were taken from me, it took a while for me to get used to them, to the thought of them being gone. But I realized they were just things. And as time has passed, I feel I still have the story. I just shared it with you of how my grandfather and I went to town and we purchased the dresses. But I don't have the dresses. And I realize I don't need the dresses. I have that memory. And that memory back there, that time that I shared with my grandfather, I mean, I've told this story many times how the lady in this store, she was like, "No, we'll get one yellow and one blue." And I was like, "No, I want two blue." And he said, "Well, let her have two blue." I'll never lose that. But that experience with him, I believe, is a little piece of me that makes me smile, that makes me kind, that kindness for me. We were creating part of my future. Those events like that. After the fire, I realized I changed my whole way of thinking. I said and I thought, do I really need all these things I had? I had clothes that I had went on shopping sprees and I still had the tag on them. I hadn't worn them. So having them in my closet, never using them, is the same as not having them. So I started a new way of thinking. That reflection, when I would reflect on that fire, I started building a new future, a future where I still have the stories, That was a good story about my grandfather. That was a not so good story about me growing up in racism. I still have those stories, but the joy I have with my grandfather, I still have. The burden or the weight of the story of my childhood and racism, I've released. And I've by releasing that now here in the presence, it allowed me to create the future I want. It allowed me to look at different layers. It allowed me to look at probably if I would have talked about that story right after it happened, it would have been an A and a B, wrong or right. Where now it's A to Z. I can go all through there and say, why did this person do this? Why? It's always a why behind it. That's why I love stories. I love to take them and reflect, okay, what was this teaching me for today? Or what was it teaching me for the future? So I totally can understand the way when you said you released it, you didn't release, you still earn it, but you don't have the weight or the burden of it. You just release it. And to me, that is life changing. And I just really wish people could just think about that. Think about your past. Don't hide, be afraid of it. Ugly, happy, whatever. Think about it and say, this is where I stand now. Okay, now I can write a new story for my future. Use what was good in the past to take forward. What wasn't, I release it. I no longer have to carry that weight.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, Alice. It was so fascinating to me. And again, think about all of these stories. Somewhere in this story, there was this. I mean, I don't want to say fire, but there's this thing of burning, right? Like of it's amazing because each one all connected in this idea of kind of the visual of, I mean, your fire and my candle and Alex's burning
Exactly.
of these,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like it may not be literal, sometimes, but this idea of this energy, right? Fire, whatever is energy, and that energy is releasing these things, and it kind of goes back to what Alex was saying earlier about that energy. But it struck me that all three of these stories talked about the energy of this fire of
Wow.
letting
Yeah.
go and allowing things to be gone. They don't disappear, right?
No.
But it's this kind of allowing for the next chapter, allowing for the next path on our journey. Almost like the clearing, you know what I mean, of as you walk down a path, that you're clearing that path as you're going through that. So I just wanted to share that because it was just so fascinating as I was listening. I'm like, wow, there's these common themes
Mm-hmm.
and in this energy, but also this idea of letting go, you know,
Well,
within our
transformation, somehow transformation.
transformation.
Yeah, because the fire, for example, it's transforming kind of something into something else. And yeah, it's definitely somehow in Alice's story and in my story, it was coincidentally kind of fire related. But I remember, John, your stories about water. It also quite
Yeah.
transformational stuff. I mean, so somehow we are able to let things go. Seems like the act is somehow related to certain level of transformation, and as a result we are lighter. As a result we have more choices,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes we do have choices where we didn't before. I mean, before we were almost, I would say, unconscious, so more like a reflexes or reactions. But having choice, it's one of the things which again, if I get back to my my favorite book about Carlos Castaneda book, and one of the exercises which I remember I started to do. It's also again, it's all about kind of gathering energy, because the whole book is about that kind of teaching how to become an energy hunter. And I remember exercise where you supposed to change your habits on a regular basis. So I remember the first thing I started to do is to brush my tooth instead of using right hand, using left hand. So every morning, every morning you could you could still be like when you're doing it on an autopilot, kind of unconscious, having no choice. You just grab your toothbrush and and at that moment you could think about hundreds of different things. You actually sleeping. I mean, maybe not literally, but you are unconscious. You are totally defined by your past. Idea is that when you decided, okay, starting from tomorrow, I'm gonna brush my tooth with the left hand. Boom. Now you're supposed to do everything totally consciously. So it's awkward, it's not automatic, it's actually not comfortable, and this is good. Meaning you're supposed to be present. You cannot think about whatever, because it's just left hand is not working the way you. So, and the idea of that changing habits on a regular basis, yeah, I remember I was doing it with hundreds of different habits. When you wake up, you just, for example, wear all the time just one slipper instead of two slippers. It doesn't matter. I mean, you could do some weird, strange habits, but the point is not a habit itself. The point is not to sleep and have choices and make everything what you do kind of consciously. And that's what increasing your energy. It does require effort, because when we are unconscious, we are practically why mind is making us unconscious, because we are not spending energy at all. But flipping side of it, we're actually not gathering energy at all. Also, we are kind of in a low energy mode. Some people are managed to do that like whole their life.
Yes.
Going in the morning to the work, do stuff, talk with people, eat, sleep. It's like everything is totally on autopilot, and this is very pity, because that's not a life. I mean, it is some kind of life, but it could be much, much more rich life if you have choices. And yeah, so that's why I brought that kind of story about the Castaneda books, because I was many years practicing that kind of increasing energy through freedom, because it's all in my head associated with the freedom, because even when you create your new habit, meaning you are free from previous habits, you are making yourself free, and you fight for that freedom on a daily basis. It's not something you could just do it once. No, let go. It's good. You need to do it every single day. Like in every almost action, you're supposed to see that. Am I doing it automatically? What are my reactions? Do I have a choice here? And if you don't have a choice, well, welcome to the sleeping world. Probably you are sleeping.
Yes.
You're supposed to have choice. Exactly, Alice. Please.
Yeah, I read this quote that said, "Some people live the same day 75 years for 75 years and call it a life."
Yeah.
And that's what happened when we do the same thing over and over and over. At the end, we call it a life. And that's not a life. That's an existence. We have to do something different. And I think when we reflect back on those stories, we become aware of, wow, I've been thinking this way for years. And it was automatic pilot, like you said, Alex. We were just going through the motion. We weren't really thinking. We had gave up our opportunity to choose something different. That's why if we look back and say, okay, this is what I was doing then, and it started me on this road, and I just stayed on this road. No, we need to veer off. We need to, what Robert Frost said, take the path less traveled. We
Yeah.
need to, go off, see what's down this road. And to do that, we have to release some of that weight that we've been carrying. Some of it is not even our weight. We just picked it up. Someone gave it to us and we took it and we've just been carrying it. And, it's like, okay, I'm tired. We need to come to a place where you can say, okay, I'm tired. This is too heavy to carry. I release it. And by telling this story and reflecting on it, it's like I have nothing to hide anymore. It's all out there. I release it. Now I can write this story for my life that I want. I can live the way I want to live.
Very inspiring. Veris, thank you.
Yes. Yeah. What a way to close this in such a nice, writing that story. Absolutely. Absolutely. And creating that imagery. I was just imagining like as if we were sleepwalking, carrying these heavy stones that we've gathered ourselves or been given, and there's a point where we have to wake up and drop them. And that is the time when we have the opportunity to create that change for the future, So thank you both so much for sharing these stories, words of wisdom and the imagery behind it. Any final thoughts or comments,
For me,
Alex or Alice?
I would just say, as human beings, let's just release, face our past, understand it, then release it, and be the author of our own story as we go forward.
Yeah. And from my side, I would just say that, well, sometimes, we need to make changes just for the sake of change itself. I mean, it's not some kind of magic bullet, but I do believe that, the power. I mean, there are different. Somehow, human history has, tricky way of creating, wisdom. Sometimes I even wrote once an article in LinkedIn, I think, where I was giving that kind of example of two proverbs which are contradicting, like to each other. There are hundreds of proverbs which are contradicting to each other. It's like they're actually preaching opposite. Like a wisdom is a little bit more elusive than it's like a yin and yang. Wisdom is somewhere actually between. So and some people say that very often the road to to development is not doing something new. It's stop doing what you do. I mean, you see that, or again, wisdom. You need to make changes, and then don't expect have this different result if you do the same thing. So right now, I gave you example of two opposite kind of recipes. So, I believe the I would say the real route to freedom is in our ability to be aware and have choices.
Yes.
Because it's not that and not that. It actually have choice, meaning gap where you have choice. But if you do it consciously as your choice, you're already free. So this is pretty much, I would say, my kind of reflect on our conversation, John.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, thank you both. This has been such an interesting conversation, but an exciting one
Yes.
about how we can create change in our lives. And So I so appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you both. Yeah.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Alice.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
See you soon for another conversation.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.